Hey guys, how are you? So tonight we're going to be going over the last portion of Genesis 38. This is part two, which continues on with the biblical account of Tamar. Tamar is, if you remember, is the daughter-in-law of Judah who was given as a wife to not one but two of Judah's sons. Now, both of her husbands died, and Judah was reluctant to give Tamar to his last son, which is according to the Levirate custom um, of marriage, is to give the wife of a deceased husband to one of his brothers. And he was reluctant to do this because he was somehow, we get the sense in the scripture linking Tamar to the deaths of his sons. So let's continue on and see how this all unfolds. Verses 12 through 14, Tamar bears a child by Judah. Yes, Judah, her father in law, not Shelah, um, Judah's youngest son. So, starting with verse 12, after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shoah, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep. And his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father in law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then set out at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw, excuse me, though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. So the first thing that I studied and researched was that, Tamar didn't have the option of finding another man to marry. She was under the headship of her father in law, Judah. And he was the one that had to give her a husband. He determined whom and when she could marry. But after waiting for Judah's son Shelah to grow up, Tamar saw, um, sure, she at some point noticed that, her father-in-law had no intentions of giving her to Shelah as a wife. And when she did, she had to have been that, really, really devastated at this point. So have you ever um had a situation, believers, where someone was supposed to look out for you and your interests and totally neglected their duties? Somebody was supposed to take care of you when you were at a vulnerable point in your life, and they just dropped the ball, without care and concern for your life. This is what Tamar was going through. And can you imagine what she's feeling at this point? you know, Waiting this long and then for a husband and then, and to be able to conceive, and being coming to the realization that this is just not gonna happen. Her father-in-law was had no intentions on doing it. So, um, and these were the circumstances, unfortunate circumstances that she was left in. So, because the life of widowed women were so destitute in the Bible, we see that, God allowed for miraculous grace to happen for widowed women who lost their sons to ensure that their family name would go on and that they would have someone to care for them. Take these three examples. First Kings chapter 17 through verses 17 through 24. Elijah restores a widow's woman's life, right? And then Second Kings chapter 4 verses 1 through 7, the Shunammite woman's son's life was restored by Elijah. And then Luke 7 verses 11 through 17, Jesus raises a widow's uh, dead son. So those are all miraculous occurrences. And so continuing on in the text, next we see that Judah reaches Timnah, and we're going to be covering verses 15 through 18. When Judah saw her being Tamar, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you?" She asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. So we see the desperation of this woman in this portion of this chapter to conceive a male heir, to grow to great lengths as to dress up as a prostitute and sleep with her father-in-law. And she successfully fools Judah into thinking that she is one. So continuing on, verses 19 through 23. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman. But he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where's the shrine prostitute who was beside the road in Enem?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. So they went back to Judah and said, so he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughing stock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." So continuing on, verses 24 through 26, about 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Child. Judah said, I'm sorry. Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. So we can see how quickly Judah was willing to condemn his daughter-in-law for her sin and not look at his own wrongdoing. And then how many of us have been like Judah, to quick to point a finger at other people's sins while we're just as much sinning as they are, or worse? How many of us out here can relate to that situation? So let's look at some scriptures that really kind of speak to this type of behavior. Luke 6:41 through 42 says, "And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove the speck that is in your eye,' when you yourself do not see the plank that is in your own eye? Hypocrite! First, remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will clearly remove the speck that is in your brother's eye, right? So pay attention. Don't judge others when you yourself have wrongdoing and sinfulness going on. So Romans 3:23 says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." All of us have. And then Matthew 7:1 says, "Judge not, that you be not judged." Remember, when you judge someone, you're pointing fingers at someone. There's gonna be a time that you're gonna come up and be looked at for your sin. So Galatians 6:1 says, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgressions, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted." Because you never know what situation you're going to be placed in and that you could fall victim to. So John 8:7 says, in referencing the scripture in the Bible about the woman caught in adultery, Jesus said, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." So, continuing on, uh, continuing on in Genesis 38, starting with verse 27. When the time came for her to give birth, there were there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out?" And he was named Perez. Then his brother who had the scarlet thread on his wrist came out, and he was named Zerah. So we can see what kind of chaos and problems can come, you know, from into our lives when we're not obedient to God. We see from we can learn from this, glean this from this chapter. Even though this woman was from a pagan family, she was not from the people of Israel. She was still expected to be treated the same way a woman of Israel would, and be given a husband from one of Judah's sons, according to the Levirate marriage. And he didn't do this. He was disobedient, and because of that, it was all kinds of problems and situations that resulted. And we can glean this and connect it to our own life. Like I said, how many times have we just gone off and done things on our own and experienced all kinds of negative consequences? You know. So, and how many of us have been like Tamar, who trusted, somebody to represent us and care for us and make sure that, we receive what is due to us, like how she was waiting for her father-in-law to help her with her situation, and being totally let down by the person. And it made me think, where man might fall short and abandon us in our time of need, how blessed are we that God never does. He never does. God always makes a way. And his grace and his mercy is continuous. Even when we fall short and we make bad choices, and we do things that really cause us even more problems, he still makes sure that we are protected. He still make sure that um, his will for us, comes forth as he did with Tamar. And she still was able to conceive children. And we see not one but two sons. So, you know, God is great, and he's so protective over his daughters, and there's so many examples of this in the Bible, which really touches my heart that God looks after his daughters, you know. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter and gleaned as much from it as I did. Thank you for following along with me. And until next time, be blessed and read ahead to Genesis 39. And I'll see you back next month. Bye bye.